Children are the epitome of innocence, until they're not. Eric Smith was a peculiar 13-year-old boy. A victim of bullying, he was often teased for the way he looked. Beside his red hair and freckles, Eric wore large, thick glasses, which were supported by a pair of low-set ears that protruded unusually from the top. Eric was a loner, often seen riding his bike around town for hours on end by himself, unable to fit in with other children. He was described by his grandparents as a child who liked to goof around a lot and often sought attention. In the summer of 1993, Eric took part in a recreation program. It might have done well for him to get out and socialize with others in a different type of environment, despite his poor experience with it in the past. Derek Roby, at only 4 years old, was also attending the program. His mother would usually walk him as he was less than a block from where it was held, but that particular day, she had been tending to his younger brother. Derek assured her he could walk himself, and she let him go. Just 5 minutes later, the Roby family's lives would be forever changed. Derek walked down the sidewalk, quickly approaching his destination, when Eric Smith just so happened to be riding by on his way as well. Eric pulled his bike over and lured Derek to an area away from the road. Once there, Eric began strangling Derek. Being 9 years younger, he couldn't put up a sufficient fight. Eric choked him to near death before digging up a couple of large rocks and dropping them on Derek's head, killing him. From there, he ripped off Derek's clothes, sodomized him with a stick he found nearby, and dumped the Kool-Aid from Derek's packed lunch into the gaping wound in his head. Eric hadn't simply killed Derek, he stuck around to enjoy what he had done. Days after the murder, Eric had dropped by the police station not to confess, but to try to aid police in solving the case. He nonchalantly spoke with investigators and joyfully gave them information about what Derek was wearing the day he was murdered. But investigators only believed that Eric was a witness at first. Derek Roby was buried in his baseball uniform on August 7th, 1993. Eric confessed to the murder 2 days later. Eric was given the maximum sentence for juveniles, 9 years to life, and he continues to serve today. Though he insists he is no longer a danger to society, he has been denied parole multiple times. His next hearing will be held in April of 2016. Sometimes evil can be so overwhelming that it simply must be shared with others. Mary Bell was born in 1957 to a 17-year-old prostitute and was fathered by a habitual criminal. Living in a slum without adequate love or care, Mary lived a terrible life. From claims that she was forced into sexual acts with men since the age of 4, to her own mother trying to kill her numerous times in the earliest years of her life. Mary, as expected, was morphed into something a child should never become: a monster. Mary had began attacking and choking a number of other children, and she was firmly reprimanded for it, but no further action beyond that was taken. Mary was only 10 years old when her acts of violence became lethal. She had managed to corner a 4-year-old boy named Martin Brown in an old derelict house, where she strangled him to death. Investigators believe that Martin's death was accidental, as there was an empty pill bottle near his body. But that assumption would prove costly, as Mary's darkness only grew darker. A short time after Martin's body was discovered, Mary took a walk to his family's house. When his mother had answered, she asked to see Martin. His mother reminded her that Martin had unfortunately died, and she replied, "Oh, I know he's dead. I wanted to see him in his coffin." A couple of months after her first murder, she began to crave another. This time, she enlisted the help of her 13-year-old friend Norma. They managed to trap a 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe. He was strangled to death, just as Martin was. But criminal behavior does tend to evolve, and Mary's sadistic cravings were no exception. Mary later returned to Brian's body and, with a razor blade, carved an N into his stomach before switching hands and turning the N into an M, possibly to signify the first letter of each girl's name. She then used a pair of scissors to cut off some of Brian's hair, slash into his legs, and mutilate his genitals. Mary and Norma were eventually caught, and when they were told by investigators that they would be charged with the death of Martin and Brian, Mary said, "That's all right by me." Mary was released from prison in 1980 at the age of 23, and she is now in her 50s and a grandmother. In some hearts lurks an evil that could never be changed. There are few cases darker than the story of Jesse Pomeroy. Jesse was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1859 to a widowed dressmaker. Jesse looked different from other children in a way that sounds like it came right out of a horror movie. Jesse's right eye was almost entirely white. Not much is known about Jesse's upbringing, but by the age of 11 he had developed a habit of taking younger boys to secluded areas, stripping them of their clothes, and tying them up. After this, he would punch and kick them until their entire bodies were bruised. Jesse's dark desires began to evolve, however, and eventually he would begin to cut his victims with a knife and knock out their teeth to disfigure them. Having such identifiable features, victims were able to easily assist the police in finding their attacker. Jesse was caught and sent to a reform school where he was to remain until he was 21 years of age. But Jesse was smart. He kept on his best behavior and led the staff at the school to believe that he was a changed boy, that he would be safe to release to the public once again. So instead of staying there for the 10 years he was supposed to, he was released after only 2. Jesse wasted little time. He had beaten and mutilated a 10-year-old girl to death, and a month later had taken a 4-year-old to a secluded area and cut him up so badly that he was nearly decapitated. The police knew of Jesse's reputation, and they knew that he had just been released from reform school. He was taken in, interrogated, and thanks to an overwhelming amount of evidence, was charged. Though he was initially given the death penalty, there was a great outcry against sentencing a child to death. He was eventually sentenced to life in solitary confinement, and he spent almost the rest of his entire 58 years on Earth there. A reporter described him as a deadened creature gazing with lusterless eyes upon a world that meant nothing to him. The child might be the last person you suspect of murder, and that's exactly what these children were counting on. That's all for now. Remember, you may not believe it, but anything is possible in a world so seriously strange. I'm Rob Dyke, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Please show the artist of this series some love by subscribing to her YouTube channel linked in the description below. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel, because you won't want to miss what's next.